The moment you believe someone else can make you angry, sad, or afraid, you've surrendered the most fundamental power you possess, the power to choose your own emotional responses. Most people live their entire lives as emotional puppets, dancing to strings pulled by family members, colleagues, strangers, and even memories of people long gone. Carl Jung discovered that emotional control is an illusion created by unconscious psychological projection. Nobody actually controls your emotions because nobody can reach inside your mind and flip emotional switches. What people can do is trigger unconscious material within you. Unresolved conflicts, suppressed aspects of personality, and psychological wounds that create automatic reactive patterns. Jung wrote in The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The person who consistently pushes your buttons isn't powerful. They're simply activating psychological material that you haven't yet integrated or resolved. The projection trap. Jung observed that intense emotional reactions to others often involve psychological projection, unconsciously attributing your own disowned qualities, conflicts, or unresolved issues to external people or situations. You're not really responding to them. You're responding to aspects of yourself that you refuse to acknowledge. When someone's arrogance triggers intense anger, you might be projecting your own suppressed arrogance. When someone's neediness creates overwhelming irritation, you could be reacting to your own unacknowledged dependency needs. When someone's success generates painful envy, you're encountering your own unlived potential reflected in another person. Jung wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, "Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face." The emotional landscape you perceive in others often mirrors your internal psychological territory that remains unconscious and unexamined. This creates what Jung called the projection trap, becoming emotionally controlled by others who are simply reflecting your own psychological material back to you. The trap operates automatically because projection happens beneath conscious awareness. Breaking free from projection requires what Jung termed withdrawing projections, recognizing that intense emotional reactions reveal more about your inner world than about external triggers. This doesn't mean that others' behavior is acceptable or that boundaries aren't necessary. It means understanding that your emotional intensity often contains valuable information about your own psychological development needs. The person who triggers your strongest reactions often carries projections of your most important unlived potential or unintegrated shadow material. Instead of avoiding or fighting them, Jung would suggest using these emotional reactions as roadmaps for personal growth. Start by examining your most frequent emotional triggers. What specific behaviors consistently provoke strong reactions? These patterns point directly to psychological material that needs your conscious attention. Understanding your complexes. Jung discovered that the psyche organizes around what he called complexes, clusters of emotionally charged thoughts, memories, and associations that operate semi-independently of conscious control. These complexes create predictable emotional vulnerabilities that others can trigger, often without realizing they're doing so. In The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, Jung wrote, "Complexes are autonomous groups of associations that have split off from consciousness. When someone activates your complex, you temporarily lose conscious control and react from the emotional pattern stored within that psychological cluster. Everyone develops complexes around core life themes: authority figures, romantic relationships, success and failure, abandonment, criticism, or recognition. These complexes form through repeated emotional experiences, particularly during childhood, and continue operating unconsciously throughout adult life unless deliberately addressed. Someone with an authority complex might experience automatic emotional reactions whenever they encounter criticism, direction, or control from others. The intensity of their response has little to do with present circumstances and everything to do with the unresolved emotional material contained within their authority complex. Complexes explain why certain types of people consistently trigger you, while others, displaying similar behaviors, don't affect you at all. The triggering person somehow resonates with your specific complex configuration, activating stored emotional patterns that feel overwhelming and immediate. Jung observed that complexes possess their own emotional logic. When a complex becomes activated, you temporarily become possessed by its emotional reality. Your usual personality recedes, and you react from the complex's perspective, often in ways that surprise you later. Understanding your complexes creates emotional freedom, because you can recognize when you're being triggered by internal psychological patterns rather than external circumstances. This recognition creates space between stimulus and response, the space where choice becomes possible. The shadow's emotional triggers. Jung's concept of the shadow, the repository of disowned and suppressed aspects of personality, plays a crucial role in emotional reactivity. People who embody your shadow qualities often provoke the strongest emotional responses because they represent parts of yourself that you cannot acknowledge or accept. In Man and His Symbols, Jung wrote, "The shadow is the thing a person has no wish to be." When someone displays shadow qualities that you've rejected in yourself, their presence creates internal conflict between recognition and denial, often manifesting as intense dislike, judgment, or emotional disturbance. Shadow projections create particularly powerful emotional triggers because they activate deep psychological defenses. The person who seems selfish might trigger someone who has completely suppressed their own healthy selfishness. The individual who appears weak could disturb someone who refuses to acknowledge their own vulnerability. Shadow work, the process of recognizing and integrating disowned aspects of personality, dramatically reduces emotional reactivity. When you accept your own capacity for the qualities you judge in others, their behavior loses its power to disturb your psychological equilibrium. Jung noted that shadow integration doesn't mean acting out negative qualities, but rather acknowledging their existence within yourself. This acknowledgement eliminates the need to project them onto others and reduces the emotional charge around witnessing these qualities in external circumstances. The people who trigger your most intense judgment often carry projections of your most important shadow material. Instead of focusing on changing or avoiding them, focus on understanding what aspects of yourself they're reflecting. Developing psychological objectivity. Jung emphasized the development of what he called psychological objectivity, the ability to observe your own emotional processes without being completely identified with them. This creates what he termed a transcendent function that can mediate between conscious intentions and unconscious reactions. In Psychological Types, Jung wrote, "The transcendent function manifests itself as a quality of conjoined opposites. This function allows you to simultaneously experience emotions while maintaining enough psychological distance to choose your responses consciously." Psychological objectivity develops through what Jung called active imagination, deliberately engaging with your own psychological processes as if they were separate from your core identity. Instead of saying, "I am angry," you learn to observe anger is present, or "this situation has activated an angry response pattern." This subtle shift in perspective creates enormous emotional freedom. When you identify completely with emotional states, you become their prisoner. When you develop the capacity to observe them, you maintain choice about how to respond. Jung distinguished between being possessed by emotions and having emotions. Possession means losing conscious control and reacting automatically. Having emotions means experiencing them while maintaining enough conscious awareness to choose appropriate responses. Practice what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, allowing contradictory feelings to coexist without immediately resolving them into action. This builds tolerance for emotional complexity and reduces the compulsion to react immediately when triggered. Emotional sovereignty. Jung's ultimate goal was what he called individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole and self-determined. Emotional sovereignty represents a crucial aspect of this development, where your emotional life becomes primarily internally generated rather than externally controlled. Jung wrote in The Development of Personality, "The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are." Emotional sovereignty means that your sense of worth, peace, and happiness depends primarily on your relationship with yourself rather than on others' behavior, approval, or emotional states. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or disconnected. Emotional sovereignty allows for deeper, more authentic relationships because you engage with others from choice rather than need, from strength rather than emotional dependency, Sovereign individuals can empathize with others' emotions without absorbing them, set boundaries without guilt, and maintain inner stability regardless of external emotional chaos. They've developed what Jung called a strong ego that can interact with challenging personalities without losing psychological center. True emotional control isn't about managing others or avoiding difficult situations. It's about developing such psychological completeness that your emotional life becomes primarily self-determined, allowing you to engage with the world from authentic choice rather than unconscious reactivity.